whatever our preconceptions of a village are or whatever it is, was yes, caste, yes, class, yes, religion, and yes, the divides they bring with them. But everywhere I went, there were also people kind of breaking those borders down and finding a way as migrants to the city, like Chand and Khalid and his wife Rabia, who meet, in this boiling mix of Delhi. They find a way to live together. And the third part of it was this question that, again, just becomes larger and larger in this country. I think every generation asks it. What is justice? When we're writing crime novels, yes, we're writing about murders and detectives and all of that. But we are also trying to ask to the family that's grieving, to the people who are left behind to carry a loss, what does justice feel like? Is it your case in the courts? Is it a verdict that might take 20 years in the making? Is it the justice of the mob? And I found myself unable to judge people for choosing one path or the other. I didn't have a form to contain this. It overstepped the bounds of journalism. And the novel, these characters started to walk into my head. I became very fond of some of them, Rabia, even the police detective, Umbir and Bhimsen, and Chand, whose life is set for him. He's a farmer, he's a unwilling widower, and he has another loss coming to him. And then he comes to Delhi because he wants to see the world and he means to see more of it. He means to go up to the Himalayas. And Delhi, this messy megalopolis, just catches at his heart.
This messy megalopolis, you spoke about walking the streets of Delhi. I have forever been fascinated by Flaneuse's Women Who Walk the Streets. And despite odds, and build a relationship with it. Delhi is very much a character in your book. I'm curious about, through these walks, how your own relationship with Delhi has changed, and what is the Delhi that we meet on these pages?
When I came to Delhi, I keep leaving and returning from Delhi, and I spent some years in Calcutta, came back for college. And I think the first thing that I felt was a sense of absolute claustrophobia, because it wasn't safe to walk after 6 p.m. It wasn't safe to walk in certain areas. You couldn't wander around in a park without, some man bumping into you deliberately. And I think somewhere in my 20s and 30s, this became an anger that refused to go away. And I was like, no, you will not stop me, And being a journalist, both on the arts beat and on the gender beat, had the wonderful thing of taking me out of my sweet, civilized, slightly boring corner of South Delhi, And it introduced me to a much wider city. This morning I was walking around your Jawahar Circle. And in the course of just 40 minutes, you meet something like, 6 different characters, and they have a different perspective on their city if you get into conversations, and conversations flow. And then little by little, the heartbeat of the city that you don't know starts to come to you. And the first thing I saw was that migrants, whom we say, migrants, the poor, do category bana diya. Okay? The poor have imagination, they have resilience, they rejoice as well, and they find a space for themselves under the bridges of the Yamuna. And one day, how did the relationship with the city change? I began to realize that it was not just mine. I began to feel a kind of love and kinship for it, no matter how aggressive it was. Because when I walked out, particularly when I walked along the banks of the Yamuna, or when I walked into areas like Welcome Colony or the slums, I was so dependent on other people and on their kindness and on their caring and on their willingness to carry me through. My margin of safety was often just built on women saying, yes, you can go here. And one time, when I was wandering around the Yamuna, I met this fellow who was very sweet and said that he was a pujari's assistant and all of that. But when we got to know each other a little better, it turned out that he was a gangster, but he was a very nice gangster and only a part-time, gang fellow. And he was like, the gangs of today are not like the gangs of yesterday. Now there's so much violent crime, it's committed by outsiders, and we have to deal with that. They have no qaida. They don't have respect for the old gangs, etc. And he told me, he said, don't go there. That's the border between Haryana and Delhi. And there you see criminals keep dumping bodies there so that it'll float from the jurisdiction of one state to the other. Okay? And I was like, Acha, theek hai, where do I go? He said, that area, where the marigold farms are and all of that. And he opened up a side of the river that I did not know about. In Delhi, we don't notice our river. We don't notice the Yamuna, right? So the more you walk, 1,000 conversations happen, and people will tell you about their lives and correct your misconceptions. If you're poor, you're not necessarily miserable. If you're a migrant who comes in without a clan to attach yourself to, you will find your own clan. You will make your friendships across whatever divides at some point. The city sucks you in.
Would you have a passage that you've written about the city that you would like to read for us at this point?
If you don't mind, it's a short passage, and it comes from, Rabia, who is, again, the wife of Khalid. Khalid is a wonderful soul. He loves animals and birds, and he carves toys out of wooden whistles. But he's also a little fragile, a little unable to take the harshness of Delhi, the police raids. And Rabia, even though she suffers from, the rising Muslim-Hindu tensions, being told that she's an outsider, she is nobody's victim. She's here, she has a way of belonging to the city. And I'd like to tell you what she thinks of that. So there they are, Chand, Rabia, and Khalid. In the evening, they've come back from their jobs, and they're cooking for each other. And eating fish, content with the evening, it comes to Chand that he might die in Delhi. An unexpected thought that he shares with Khalid and Rabia. He is not yet 30, so death is a long way off for any of them. But when he tries to recollect the past dreams that he had harbored at 16, he feels he has stopped desiring either return or further exploration. You can live in a city for decades without knowing if you belong to it, he says to Rabia and Khalid. So what do you think you were breathing in all these years? Asks Rabia, cleaning stray bits of fish innards and blood off the curved blade of the boti. The air, the floating grime in the air, the rain, the monsoon breeze, the water, the earth, everyone's sweat, the farts from the buses, the politicians' nonsense speeches, the dust in summer, the mist of the river in winter. What is this belonging, not belonging? At some point, what you breathe in is what you become. That's no surprise.
Neela, like I was saying in the introduction this earlier today, this book works at many different levels. But like you said, it's a book about a crime to begin with. And you write about the crime in the manner of very taut, wonderfully written thrillers. So in that sense, it's also a whodunit. And that, according to my mind, is one of the greatest genres of literature. And I am in complete envy and awe of anyone who can crack it. So I'm asking you now to give me some tips on how do you crack this genre. What do you see as a good thriller? What goes into the making of it, the pacing, and who are the writers you've taken notes from?
I'm so happy to see a lot of crime fiction coming out in India, and I want to mention a few people, Tanuj Solanki, Anita Nair, writing in the UK about India's colonial past. There's Abir Mukherjee. And one of the reasons why we are gravitating to this is because from strictly the writing pleasure point of view, the clockwork of a crime novel is absolutely fascinating. It's terrifying as well. Agatha Christie did it beautifully. Val McDermid, the Scandinavians, Japanese writers like Keigo Higashino, they get all the invisible stuff behind the scenes that makes you feel the pace. And Black River, I think it's my first attempt at a crime novel. It actually starts with 3 crimes. And people remember one, because that one touches your heart. But the other 2 are equally painful. One is the removal of a woman who doesn't command your pity, and yet should she be removed in that fashion? Okay? I think one of the reasons why we love crime fiction is because, I've said this before, but it's a smuggler's genre. You can do so much with the detective novel, and I stand on the shoulders of many people abroad who've done that. Ian Rankin, he writes about cities and the history of cities. And I think it was important to me, wherever you come from, you see your city differently when you see it through the eyes of people who are not like you. And you see, is it welcoming? Is it inclusive? In the middle of its aggression or harshness, does it find space? Where are the fault lines? Where do people disappear and where are they swept away? And you can put all of that in, and the other part of it is you can have tremendous fun, which I did with the police section to some extent, because Umbir and Bhimsen, I met a lot of policemen like them who were caught in a terrible police force, understaffed, under-serviced in many ways, terrible quarters to live in. The few computers they have are broken down and dusty. The Malkhana is a disused toilet that's been repurposed or something like that. And there's corruption all around them. As a state becomes darker and more corrupt and more authoritarian, the police also becomes harsher, the lathis come out a little stronger. But there's also humanity, na? And there's also that impulse, sometimes against their own will, towards see that justice happens, and it's a very inconvenient impulse for them sometimes. But they can't stop that entirely. So all of that, rolls around. I think crime fiction just allows you to jump into several things at the same time. It's noir. There's the detective side of it, which is such a pleasure, just the solving of something. And at some deep atavistic level, no matter how, dark or cynical the world becomes, don't we all still believe in justice of some kind, A loss has happened, a life has been taken. Don't we want to see it come out right in the end, whatever that right is, whatever that right means?
I was going to ask you this later, but since you brought up Ombir and Bhimsen, it was a surprising choice to have them as very loosely the moral center of your book. I mean, if it has a moral center, then perhaps one can argue that it's Ombir and Bhimsen. And at least of late, we're not used to portraying cops in that manner. In the popular consciousness, cops are either Bollywood cops who come once all the action is over, or then they become highly corrupt agents of the state who have nothing good to offer. And your portrayal, of course, is much more complex. I mean, they are not do-gooders in that sense of the word, but there is a moral center that vests in them despite the fact that they belong to this bedraggled force that is struggling in many ways, morally and as well as in terms of resources.
I think one of the learnings for me was that we tend to take something like the police and say, okay, there's the police and there's us. And we create a divide between the two communities. I see the police slightly differently. I've had a lot of conversations with them, occasionally in protests. I don't know how much I can say, but let's say that the conversations have been very short and perpetrated at the rough end of a lathi or a tear gas canister. And I know the kind of prejudice that happens. I also know that when the police force in general can be a force of tremendous conscience, a reassuring presence, it can be casteist, it can be communal, it can be exceedingly violent. But you know what it is, Pragya? The way your police is just a reflection of a society in flux and of your darkest urges. When your RWAs are saying, lock this person up, hound them out of the colony, then your police force is going to stand there with the lathi saying, if you don't think like us, get out of here. We're here to enforce the law. I remember a time also when the police was slightly different, never perfect, but always an accurate reflection of both the darkest and sometimes the most hopeful parts of us. I met men like Ombir and Bhimsen, and Ombir is not a hero by any means, He's very happy to take his hafta packets. He's basically like, okay, I'm going to go along with the system, something not mentioned in Black River, but it's there in the architecture of the book, is one of the reasons why he's interested in this crime is because he knows this girl. And because it's not said, but it's there again, they are the same caste, or at least of close enough caste. I don't know how his compassion is awakened, though, when somebody else is put through a terrible, he has a compassion towards children. And that force moves against his inertia. And I found that struggle in him absolutely fascinating to experience. In a lot of the conversations that I've had with constables particularly, Nobody knows a neighborhood better than a constable. You know, nobody knows it more intimately. They walk that. They feel also a tremendous sense of the more cruel a policeman is. It's surprising how often the more depression they go through or the more alcoholism there is in the force. The people who are the best torturers often end up their careers in ways that I don't like to think about because there's a lot of darkness there. You can't wade into darkness. You can't wade into grimness. You can't wade into violence without changing your soul to some extent. And Ombir and Bhimsen were interesting to me because they had a sense of sturdy rightness. Somewhere, a flicker of that oath that you take. Somewhere, a feeling that justice is okay. It's a luxury commodity, yeah. I was told this by a cop, you know, कि अमीर लोगों के लिए है. It's for the rich. It's for those who can afford it, those who are politically connected. You from the upper caste, you can walk into a police station and maybe expect justice. But sometimes that luxury also is for just those who've suffered. And sometimes they feel it.
Neela, this book is about gender violence. Like you said right at the very beginning, gender violence has been, it feels like in our society, for 1,000,000 years, it's been a plague that we've lived with. But you're also talking about sort of particular social ferment and the politics of hate that's beginning to take root in ways that are unprecedented over the last decade or so. And I couldn't help but wonder that as a reporter, you know, there is a set format in which we know we practice taking down facts and reporting them. But when you're writing a story as deeply moving and emotional as this, while responding to these very real phenomena, how do you maintain critical distance? Was it ever challenging?
I failed.
You didn't.
I failed in the distance part of it. I mean, I think I write from my instincts and I write very strongly from my emotions. And I did a lot of stories that required, walking around, meeting people over periods of time. A story on the homeless women of Delhi that I will never forget for the New York Times. So many of them just disappeared again, during the writing of the story and to no good end. And after a while, a book is not a place to, a book is not your therapist. Fiction is not, the place that you go to work out your feelings. Absolutely not. But fiction is a place of transformation for me, and a place where, as you write, that writing changes you. Hopefully, I never know whether I've got this right, but hopefully it changes the reader just a little bit again. And some of that anger and that grief that you feel at the loss of potential. When we talk about gender violence, what do we mean? We mean that whether it's in the home or on the street or in 1,000 different ways in the workplace, you are held back. When we talk about the rise of hate, we're also talking about the interruption of love, aren't we? We're talking about the interruption of friendship. And to me, friendship, fraternity, one of the great promises of the preamble is what this country was built on as a nation. When I say that, I don't mean to, stand on a podium and orate. It's just that it touches your heart when you walk among people, when you talk to them, and you have a dozen conversations saying, this person is Muslim, I'm Hindu, or this person is upper caste and I'm lower caste. And okay, back in the village, we wouldn't get to meet. But here in this tiny sliver of land here, or, at the abattoir, at the slaughterhouse, there is a place where you can sit and have a cup of tea together. Friendships can form, and there is that incredible human curiosity about each other. I was writing a lot of this in over a period of years, but a lot of this happened in 2016, 17, and it seemed to me that, so much is happening, and so much is captured. The news is unending. There's breaking news every day. Sometimes we're told that everything in the country is absolutely fine. Sometimes it's not. And the silences speak that loudly. And I think I was very afraid that all of what was going on in that time would drop into a memory hole. And there were two things. Rabia comes from a place called Bright Delhi, which is based on several places I know. Chand lives in a village called Titarpur. And Rabia and Chand have an affinity. They have a friendship. They are the adults in the room, where Khalid is there. But in all of Delhi, where are they going to meet? Where is the coffee house they can meet in? A Muslim woman, she can't go over and meet her friend in a Hindu village. A Hindu man, he can't sit in Bright Dairy with her on the steps. What would the neighbors say, right? And yet, despite that, there is an overflowing of boundaries. So hate rises, and in the middle of that, as people are slammed back, and this is what I was saying, the early rise of the bulldozers, breaking down houses, the othering, the separation of ourselves from ourselves. That is all that hate is when it is turned on communities. And you can talk about the politics of it or the uses of it or whatever. But fundamentally, hate is a way of saying your brother is not your brother. Your family is not your family. You are separate from each other. It's a separation. And yet, it is astonishing how we continue to reach across that, how we continue to form friendships and fall in love, in a way that we are not supposed to.
Neela, the women, of course, like we've said over and over again, this is a book about gender violence, but the women in your book are just unforgettable characters. Outside of their circumstances, they find ways of showing up for themselves. They make morally complex choices. I had two questions about this. One is, I wondered, and this comes from my own struggles with writing, if you've ever had any anxieties about writing the other. That could be someone from a lower caste. I mean, we come from high caste backgrounds, from someone from another caste, someone from another class, someone with an experience like motherhood that neither of us have. I was wondering if you've ever had any and how you overcome them, if you've ever had any anxieties about it. And I was wondering about your own relationship with all of these women. I feel towards the end of the book that I know Rabia really, really well, and I just am so curious about Bachni. I want another book on just her. So I was wondering what your relationship is with them.
Thank you so much for that. I think I had two choices as a writer. One of them I don't think I'm very good at, which is just writing about people who are exactly like me, a Bengali from Calcutta transplanted into Delhi, making friends in the city. And for some reason, my curiosity went wider. I was so anxious about this, all of this. I mean, you mentioned I'm writing out of caste, out of class, out of religion as well. But we are not strangers to one another, Pragya. The thing I worried about most was writing parents. I don't think that you can write in a way that just takes, that says, here are your lives, here is your pain, here are your stories, this is what you've told me, and now I will take it for my book. You can't do that. But I think you have to earn it, and very often my characters, fictional characters are real. The best way I can explain it is, it's like talking to a friend whom you know very well who's not right there. But in your imagination, that person is alive. And there were so many times when Rabia silently just told me, I'm not this sanctimonious, I'm not going to suffer, there is more to my life than this. Often what the characters just said, you don't know enough. You're misinterpreting us, you're misreading us. So then you go out and you look and you listen and you have 1,000 more conversations. And it is only when I think you need to be a little humble to do this. You need to get your ego well out of the way. And you need to be uncomfortable. One of my characters, somebody I loved very much in the book, and I grew very fond of, is a deeply moral person, a wonderful father, but he would commit murder without hesitation, And in his book, in his case, it's fine. Even the murder of somebody he has sheltered at a different time. And I had to just look at that without judgment. So humility and judgment. And then when you feel that you actually understand, then you can just let them right through you. You see what I mean? And with parenthood, I'm not a mother, but I've been a child. And I trusted that that might be enough. I saw so much, we've talked about the grimmer side of things, the families bereaved, the families mourning their teenage daughters, their young girls. But something that astonished me and that I wasn't prepared for was how fathers in their 20s, 30s, 40s, were so happy to be fathers. And even though the girls they were bringing up were sometimes burdens, they loved their daughters. And I said, I thought, where is this written about? Why isn't this recorded? What is this new thing that's emerging? Or is it old? I didn't know. But I knew it was there. And ultimately, this is not a book. It's a book that goes maybe through killing and through separation and through this time of hate. But I do think that the tenderness and the love in it is also real. And that came from them. That came from the people who, as fiction as they might be, trusted me to ferry their lives across into a book.
Final question, Neela, and then we'll do a reading if there's time. When do you know a book is done? Because a story like this can keep going. And you did write it over a period of time. And if you're willing to talk about it, can we expect this story to continue in another novel?
I don't know that the book's done. I think when you finish a book, you just get to an ending. The first 3 drafts were terrible. One of them was an angry edit masquerading as a novel. One of them, at that time, I just didn't know enough about this world. And so I was writing inadequately, thin sentences, right? The third one, it starts to come together. And then you feel it. The third one is also the one where the stories of other characters starts to explode outside the book, right? Because they have so much to say and they're very lively. And they talk a lot. In fact, they talk a lot in your head all the time. And somewhere around the 4th draft, I think you sense, you've written not your story, but you've written what the story demands, hopefully, right? And then you turn to your agent with a sense of pleading, or your editor, and you say, okay, is this it? And he's like, okay, fine. Or she's like, yeah, it's good to go. And then you get to that last draft where you're not letting go, because once you do, you have to say goodbye to them. And you've lived with them. Rabia Chand, Umbir Khalid, Behida, who's Chand's first wife who died, Munia. They were as close to me as you are, as my friends are. They were friends. And I will never get to see most of them again, except for one, and that person is coming back in the next novel. And, this story opens with a murder that was very hard to write for me. But I don't want to read that section. I just want to introduce you to a father and his daughter, if I may, Chand and Munia, And this is, it happens in a hospital on the outskirts of Delhi. Chand's wife is rushed in there in childbirth. She has to share a bed with one other woman because there's a lack of space. And in the middle of the confusion and the doctor surging and her bleeding too much, this miracle happens, this little miracle. Once, Chand had almost stepped on a dazed bat, fallen to the ground in some nocturnal mishap. He had bent and picked it up, wanting to be gentle, and felt the creature curl and shiver in his careful hands. He remembers that weight, the delicacy of it, the trembling bones, when he holds his daughter for the first time, taking her from Rabia. She weighs less than a paper bag of flour, less than a pillow stuffed with black mustard seeds. She smells like the warm spring grass when he takes a sickle to it, like the first rains of summer falling on the hot earth, the scent of her neck like jaggery stirred over an open fire. She smells of her mother's blood and of her own sweetness. If he strokes her forehead lightly, letting his fingers touch her miraculous skin, still sprinkled with the white down of birth, she curls her feet inwards and goes to sleep in his arms. Through the numbness of his sudden loss, these things of sustenance. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Neela. This still brings tears to my eyes. We have a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions from the audience? We've got 10 more minutes. Excellent, excellent. The lady over there, please.
Hi, my name is Soumya. I'm looking forward to reading this book. And before I ask my question, I wanted to tell you, you sound sweet and melodious when you speak. So, my compliments to you for that. My question is not really a question, but my observation, being a professional myself, that being a woman, when you go out in the workplace, like our mothers taught us to be powerful and strong and enter the room like, like you own the world. This is how our mothers raised us. But when you actually enter that world and the workspace, you come across many hawks who are ready to pull you down. Like there's a phrase called PhD, we say pull her down. So that's how my seniors taught me, that PhD is not doctorate of philosophy, but it's all about pull her down. So when men are actually doing that, and it's not really about your caste, your class, or your creed, but it's about your looks, how you appear, and how sexist they become in your workspace. So how do you handle all these things, being yourself a woman who has been a journalist and have traveled to places which nobody in Delhi would dare to go and look for stories? So how do you see women in workplace coming out and being subject to these sexist comments? Thank you.
Great question. I think one of the first decisions I made, and not just me, but an entire generation of journalists, Pragya herself, Neha Dixit, Betwa Sharma, Supriya Sharma, there's Shohini, who's right here, Shohini Chattopadhyay. I made a decision not to be timid about taking up space. My mothers and grandmothers had literally earned that. And I knew how fragile these freedoms were, how recent these freedoms were that we all have. My father's mother was married off when she was 12 years old. And she had her first children when she was 14 or 15. She taught herself how to read when she was about 16 or 17, and she became a writer. She became a writer of poems. She became a writer of stories. My struggle is nothing compared to hers. When I step into, walking around, Shohini again is the expert on that. But yes, you look for safety, but most of all, you realize that if one moment moves ahead, another will come. Another will come. And, some men have been allies, and some will make space for you, and if they don't, we have each other. We will make that space, and we will keep doing it.
As a complete other in Delhi, I read this book in 2022, and I almost wept with the humanity of it. It was one of the most wonderful books I think I've ever read. But could you... and rather unattractively, I wonder whether you could just talk a little bit about Jolly G.
Okay, I'm going to try not to give away any spoilers, but Jolly G taught me that even when you don't like a character, you must find a way to see them also and where they've come from with some compassion. He is the wealthiest man in Titarpur. His house commands a hill on which there's a temple. And the key to his nature, again, I'm trying not to give away too much, is not just wealth and power. That's only what he represents. The key to his nature is impulsiveness. And he's never in his entire life had to face consequences. And I've met men like Jolly G all my life. Often their opening question is, don't you know who I am? And I think... you're the one who's lost. You don't know who you are. You don't know what this has done to you, what power has done to you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? I'll give you a minute to think about it, and until then I'll ask Neela. Oh, there is one. Fantastic.
Yeah, I haven't read the book, so I don't have a question on the book. I do read your columns in the FT every weekend. Where do you find the time to read all of those books that you write about?
I don't think I would be a writer if I wasn't a reader, and I have cunningly taken jobs that allow me to read for a living, But honestly, okay, I don't watch TV, and except for the distraction of 4 rambunctious cats who require a lot of my time, and family whom I love, and friends and the social life and the writing. Okay. I don't know, it just kind of happens, you know. But there's always a pile of books. I mean, just look at this place. Look at what's happening in Jaipur. Everybody out here, I see people flocking to bookstores, you know, getting into long conversations with authors. And I just want to remind myself all the time that we are lucky to be celebrating reading and to being readers. And so the time happens.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? At the back? There's one, the lady there.
Hi, Nilanjana. I was just curious, did you decide that you wanted to do crime fiction and start the process of this story from the crime itself, or did you start from the characters?
That's very acute. You know, that is clearly a writer or a critic in the making. Because, no, I'd never sat back and thought, I don't think in terms of genres. I've written 2 books of fantasy fiction before, and it was only after I wrote them that I realized, okay, fine, if it's about, you know, cats and cheels and mice in Nizamuddin, it's probably fantasy. But I'm very genre challenged. I tend to, you know, move from one to the other in the same book a lot. And what happened with Black River was, it was Chand and Munia and Rabia first who emerged. And then Umbir was like, no, I'm not a cartoon. That's the policeman. And then slowly it started to take shape over multiple drafts. And I realized, all right, you know, this is technically whatever you want to call it. You want to call it noir fiction, I'm going there. You want to call it detective fiction or a crime novel, I'm happy with the label. But to me, it was always about not a crime, not a murder. It was about the aftermath of that. And that aftermath was not just about, you know, justice or the procedure or how different people find that. That aftermath was also simply about when it all dies down, when the TV cameras go away, you're still left with your grief, you're still left with that absence. And how do you find a way around that? How do you carry that through a lifetime? You see? So that's where it came from. Thank you so much.
This question.
Thank you so much, both of you. As a budding writer, I have a question about the characters. You said you go and you visit places and, you know, the people you interview. The characters that you form, are they a conglomerate of many people that you meet? Or you meet one person and you say, this is my character? And do they come to you? I hear people saying all the time that they spoke to me and they came to me. Is it in dreams that they come, or is it when you're waking and talking, you just get an intuition? I'm just curious about the method of writing.
You're getting to the heart of the mystery of fiction, so that's actually a really good question. I don't do composites. You know, I don't do composites because none of us in the audience, we are not a mashup of various people, and that just wouldn't work. And I don't base it on a single person because I spent too many years as a journalist. It would feel wrong. Yeah. It would feel like I was robbing somebody without their consent, and consent is really important to me. But what happens is strange. You know, once you open up a door to the imagination, and this is what fiction is all about, this is where the power of it comes. Once you become, you know the territory, right? You know the language they speak, and I don't mean, you know, whether they speak in Hindi or Bangla or English. I mean that every person has a particular register. They might speak in complete sentences or half thoughts. Somebody might have a very visual way of speaking. Somebody might be very tactile, sensual. Somebody might be reticent, but be thinking so much in their heads, right? So once you have that down, it's not mechanical. Every single one of my main characters, at some point, I can't explain it. You see them, you know. You're walking around your city, and on a bridge, on the ITO bridge, it's crowded, it's smoky, it's polluted, and I'm thinking, my God, I hate crowds. And there's a young man standing there, and he's looking down, and he's mesmerized, and his eyes are filled with dreams. You know, to him, it's just not a crowd. It's so exciting to be young and here and see the air filled with dreams and possibilities. And I blink and he's gone. He was never there, but that was Chand coming to the city. I turn a corner somewhere, and there's a woman getting off a bus, and she's moving in that way, which is like, okay, I know this is not a safe area. I'm targeted, but her shoulders are also going back, and her head is up. She's not going down without a fight, and that was Rabia. And Munia I was standing on the roof one day, one very cold winter's morning, and Munia turned and she ran across the fields and she started the book off. I think you just have to be willing, and that willingness, that openness, is where fiction happens. But truth to tell, it is visionary. I mean, they come to you, but they come to you only when you earn it.
Is that a question? Would you like to ask a question? All right. Sorry, we have just 10 seconds, but I'm sure she'll answer it after because we've already got the mic.
It's a short question. I'm Sucheta, by the way.
Hi.
Hi. Was it a conscious decision to write about working class characters?
I was writing about Delhi, you see? And then you have to write about the people who built the city, the people who flow in and out of it, and the people whose love for the city is as great as my own love. I don't think I divided them into class. At some point, a friendship developed, and with my fictional characters. And once that happened, trust developed. And once there was trust, I was free to write. I hope that answers things.
That's bang on the clock. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you for speaking with me, Nilanjana.
Pragya, thank you so much for this, as ever.
Thank you. The books are available in the bookstore, and I'm sure Nilanjana would be very happy to sign them for you, for your friends, if you'd like to gift them. The book signing booth is right there. So please buy copies, gift copies, and get Nilanjana to sign them. Thank you.
Subscribe to Oneindia channel and never miss an update.